Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
You know, it's often been said that you can't change somebody. They are what they are. Is that really true? And let's say you want to make changes within yourself. Let's say you want to stop smoking, or there's other things. Can those changes take place? How do they take place? Well, partly with the help from an amazing psychologist who is back with us. Dr. Roger Lavine is on the program. Hey, Roger, how are you?
I'm very good. Good to see you again.
You too. You too. And this whole change thing, this is something you're well aware of in helping a lot of people change in many different directions. What are some of the things that truly can be changed within somebody?
Well, I think the obvious, easiest thing is to change a behavior, right? We can all, at least in a limited way, change some of our behaviors, but probably some of the more difficult things are, to change the way we feel or an attitude, or probably the toughest is a belief.
And I would imagine the first thing we need to do in that is recognize the belief, because I'm sure a lot of us don't know what our beliefs or limiting beliefs are.
Exactly. I think one of the main clue we get is our emotions, right? We may find we're uncomfortable or we're fearful or angry, and maybe even feel it's not working for us. But then, we tell ourselves a story as to why we're angry or whatever, quite often blaming the other person or the situation. But it takes a little work to figure out what's really going on in that 95% of our processing that's called the subconscious.
Yeah. Behavior, is that one of the most easiest things to change or one of the most hardest things to change?
Well, if you look at behaviors, what happens is if we experience something once, it's just an experience. We experience it a few times and then we've learned something, right? I learned how to do a podcast. Mm-hmm. If I do it often enough, it becomes a habit. And if the habit brings me pleasure, it can become an addiction.
Let me process that for a second, because I thought I heard you say in the very beginning when we first started doing podcasts together that a habit is only followed by something that's pleasurable. You can't have a habit unless there's something, a positive point from it. Is that right?
Well, there's a reward.
Okay.
And the reward could be the ending of a negative reinforcement. So like your seat dinging for your seatbelt, right? It can be a habit to put on your seatbelt because it's not pleasant, but you want the binging to go away, right?
Fair enough.
So there's a reward, but it's the removal of a negative consequence.
Yeah.
So you can get a habit for that as well. But you won't get addicted to putting your seatbelt on like you will for booze or food.
Are there others, and I'm just curious to better understand it, but are there other situations where it's not a true reward, like we said with the seatbelt alarm that's going off? Are there other ones that would fall into that category?
I think probably the biggest one is to avoid more stress. Lots of times people blow up a relationship or blow up a job, and they'll do it repeatedly, right? But it's their way of avoiding staying in the stressful situation.
And that's their reward. But that's not a positive.
No. Well, that was your question. You said,
yeah.
Can you have a habit that isn't rewarded by positive? Well, yeah, it's rewarded, but maybe the outcome isn't so positive, which are the kinds of things we want to change. And usually that kind of stuff happens because they become survival mechanisms as a kid. They become habits, and then they're never challenged again. And it gets back to, your point about, is it easy to change a behavior? Well, the farther up the line it becomes, the harder it is. So it's harder to change a habit than it is just something you've learned. And the next stage after a habit is you identify with it. I am an angry person, or I am something, right? So once you identify with it, I am a smoker. Once you identify with it, when you go to change it, there's part of your subconscious that says, oh, I'll be a nothing. I'll be a doormat. I won't have any identity. So when an experience that's, a behavior that's an experience that becomes something we learn how to do, becomes a habit, when it gets all the way to something I identify with, because people would say it's part of my personality, now it's much harder to change, because when I go to change that behavior, part of my brain's going to say, well, who are you going to be if you give this up?
I just had a thought. Going to the gym and working out, the positive could be the feeling you get when you leave the gym, the rush of chemicals in your brain. You have just a more positive feeling. Maybe you didn't want to go first thing in the morning, but after that, there's a reward. I'm going to feel good, or I'm going to feel good because I'm taking care of myself. Would that come under the category of the rewards?
Yes, I think you'll find that people have a habit of going to the gym, and then they feel like they're missing something when they don't, right?
Right. So to make these changes, you have to identify why you're doing what you're doing. I would think that's the first step. Where do you go from there?
Well, first of all, you have to come to an awareness that this isn't working for me.
Okay.
Right? In some way. Because back to the reward. Okay, so it's not working for me what am I getting out of this, right? Reward may be a wrong term in the way people would think, but we're always getting something out of the behavior, either now, or if it's become a habit, we used to get something from it. So what did I get from this behavior, right? And probably the biggest thing, even if you don't figure out what that is you have to stop justifying the behavior. I've never seen anyone change who still had a reason for why they were doing it. It just has to become unacceptable.
I call it the scale of life. I put the pros and the cons in my mind in front of me, where you can put them down on paper and then weigh them out. Why do I do this? Well, that's good, but then that's not good, and kind of a scale, and then kind of tip the scale. Is that reasonable to do in a lot of situations?
It's good to reflect and have some insight, because one of the things when you make the commitment to make the change, you also got to accept the consequences. Lots of times we avoid changing because we don't want to deal with the consequences.
Right. And you said a powerful thing just there, in that you've made a commitment to make the change.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, after you have awareness, you have to set the intention and make a commitment.
I think, and I'm not the expert, far from it whatsoever. I think that's probably the most important part, next to realization of what's going on, that commitment. Because if you don't have that commitment, you're not going to get that change.
Correct.
It's almost
because until you make that commitment, you're still justifying. And the way you made the commitment is you're no longer justifying it. Like, I get a lot of people come to me because they're angry a lot, and usually it's the spouse who sends them, right? It's like, you got to do something with your anger. You're always coming home, you're angry or whatever. I just don't like to be around it. Not that they're abusive or whatever. It's just no fun to be around the person who comes home from work every day riled up and angry, right? And those people will come and they'll be like, well, I'm doing it because I have this demanding job and these jerks and blah, 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 right? There's always all these reasons. And I'm not saying they're excuses, but they're rationalizing that it's okay to have this behavior because something's justifying it. Whereas if they come and they say, okay, I'm just not going to allow myself to be angry anymore, no matter what, right? Then we start looking at ways of handling those same situations without anger. But so long as it's justified, they're not ready to change.
What about if it's somebody who works, multiple jobs, doesn't get enough sleep or tries to, fit to sleep in, and it's just cranky, not angry, but just not in always a great mood. Maybe after a nap, they're better. In a situation like that, we don't want to make an excuse for it, but it's a lifestyle. How do you gravitate away from
I
feeling that?
Just this morning, I was seeing a fireman, exactly that problem, right? And it's a busy fire department. He goes on at least 8 calls a day.
Wow.
So you can imagine the pumped up scenario, right? And so we just took apart his day, and one of the things was it found that he thought when something happened, he had to think it through so he wouldn't be angry anymore.
He had to think it through. Give me an example how that would go.
So, like, say, another firefighter took his lunch or something, and right, and he'd want to really let him have it. He'd get very angry because he's already at level 5 just from the job. Get
Okay, so
very
you
angry.
mean somebody physically took his lunch out of the
Correct.
refrigerator? Okay.
Right. So he's really angry about having somebody take his lunch. And he knows that if he thinks about it long enough, he won't be confrontational and he'll deal with it in the same way. So typically he would think about that for an hour or so to work his way down to not being angry. And he thought that was helping. But in essence, well, only thing that got him to not be angry was the fact that time took place and he metabolized the adrenaline and cortisol. So I said, well, let's take this approach. Instead of thinking about it, right, and losing another hour and pumping yourself up, ask yourself, what can you change right now? And I mean, what can you do right now? And in this case, he couldn't do anything. He wasn't going to confront the guy when he's angry. So, okay, so what could you do? He said, well, I could take a walk or I could clean the apparatus or whatever. So, okay, do something you have control over. Okay. Right. And then trust that when you're in with this guy again, that you know how to handle it. Do you know really how to handle it properly when you see the guy again? And he laughed. He said, yes, I really don't have to think about it. Yeah, I know how to talk to the guy. And so it was letting it go and just suffering the 20 minutes that it would take for the adrenaline to pass rather than making it an hour. And when you timed this towards all the little incidents in the day that he has in this pretty stressful job, not with his coworkers, but in other things, it was the way he was thinking about life and some of his philosophy that was adding to his anger issues and his stressed out.
If someone took my lunch, I'd be angry too.
Right. But but it wouldn't be for an hour and it probably wouldn't be something that could be carried on into going home. But because of all the other background stuff, in his case, it would.
Yeah, I get it, but it would irk me. And I can see if there's other things that have stacked up in the day that's one more on the stack of just annoyances. But yeah, you can't carry it with you. Then you got to be proactive. Okay, somebody took your lunch. That's not happening anymore. Why is that not happening anymore? Take the steps, secure your lunch, do whatever.
Yeah, but your thinking is when you're first angry is not the best.
Right.
So you got to trust that when you calm down, you'll come up with the right answer. And what you want to do is keep a 20-minute event. It takes about 20 minutes to metabolize your adrenaline and cortisol, right? So you want to keep this to a 20-minute event, not a 1-hour event.
Sure.
When he was thinking, he made it a 1-hour event, which if you do that enough times during the course of a day and you're already tired and you're already stressed out, you're looking at optimizing. You want to keep any trigger to 20 minutes and not allow it to become 2 hours or 2 days or 2 months.
Yeah. Totally reasonable. And maybe look at the positive side. Example, last week I picked up a check from somebody and drove to the bank, was just about to walk into the bank and realized they didn't sign it. I was like, I could have gotten angry. I just turned around, went back and had them sign it. Wasn't, a large trip, but it did take more time in my day. But I looked at it this way. I saw it before I actually went into the bank, waited online. I could have gotten up to the counter and handed it to them, and they could have said, no, we can't do anything with this. It's not signed. So I was grateful that I just happened to look down. I don't normally do that. So I saved a little bit of time, and it was, troublesome, but a fix. Maybe he can look at it in terms of somebody stealing his lunch, in that I'm going to come up with a solution, and I feel great. This is never going to happen again. And I'm never going to let that coworker trigger me. And it's understandable that it does, but I'm not giving them my power, and I'm not allowing them to let that happen again, because I'm going to do this, whatever this is. But
the Stoics would call that the obstacle becomes the way. You see the check isn't signed, instead of getting frustrated like it's holding you up, you say, I'm going to have new and different experiences because of this. It didn't really hurt me. I'm fine.
No. And I wasn't late for anything, but I had but I had to pick up the pace for the rest of the day or the rest of the next couple of hours. But, full disclosure, I was talking with a friend of mine, and we were just talking about our day, and I threw that one in because it's just, it's one of those, share it with somebody else in case that happens to you. Make sure you check the check.
So the awareness, then the emotion will give you a clue. Then you got to dig down in your beliefs, right? And in his case, his beliefs really came back to he can't let other people get over on him.
Exactly. For his situation, now, as a psychologist, you handle it that, certain way. Could you, or would you also handle it with hypnotherapy?
If he had a lot of anger issues and they came back to an issue like his identity formed as a child, right, that he didn't want to be walked on anymore, yeah, I might use some hypnotherapy on that to help him change that belief and to help him visualize being a new person.
Gotcha. Okay. And do you encounter this a lot in terms, it seems like it's fundamental for your line of work, in terms of you're helping people change all the time, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I think the hard thing is getting people to let go of that identification with a behavior and realize that they can change, that when they change, they'll like themselves even better than they like themselves now. Like in this guy's case, you won't be milk toast. You'll be a tough guy, just, in a different way.
Yeah, you'll be a tough guy in a strategic way, because I'm
Exactly.
right away. My brain goes to, oh yeah, you're going to take my lunch? No, you're not. And whatever that may be, and there's so many different solutions, right down to getting your own mini refrigerator and putting it in your area with a lock, whatever it is.
And what happens is, if you can give up that angry automatic behavior and learn a new one, now you have a choice. When something happens to you, you can still do the old thing, or you can handle it much better. Like this same guy has a son with Tourette's, which he doesn't want to always be challenging and be offended by, because the child will mimic him sometimes and say stuff that is, so it's like he needs the freedom to not always get angry when he's, you could say justifiably provoked, but it's not always going to work, right? Anger isn't always going to work, no matter what the justification may be for why we're feeling it.
And
there
that's
may be a better answer.
That situation you gave with the son, very challenging too. There's a lot of emotion mixed into that anger.
Exactly.
Yeah. Roger, somebody wants to work with you and make those changes, and we know that they're possible once you have the awareness. And I think if this is resonating with anybody, they already got step one of the awareness. They're thinking about things that they need to change.
Exactly.
How does it begin with you?
You contact me through Dr. Lavine, DoctorLavine.com, drlavine.com.
And not a session, obviously, but if somebody has questions, whether what they're experiencing is a right fit, is that a free consult with you?
Correct.
Excellent.
We do a telephone consult.
Got it. Roger, so great having you on. And I'm glad we talked about this because it is really the baseline for everything that moves us, and especially for what you do to help people. So thank you for being here.
Have a great day.
You too.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.